Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint Joseph, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. I had mentioned last night when I was speaking to some young adults that a few years ago I was speaking at a Catholic high school, and before my talk, a presenter got up and he said to the students, now I'm going to give you quotes, and I want to see if you know who said the quote. And he starts off with some really raunchy lyrics from a rap song, and all the kids know the name of the artist, they yell it out loud, and they all start singing the song. He said, okay, let me give you another one. He gives them some more raunchy lyrics, and all the kids start singing the song. He did this for numerous songs, and then he said, okay, I've got one more quote for you. Let me know if you know who said it. A man shall leave his father and his mother, cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Who said it? Now, a hushed silence fell over the crowd of like 800 Catholic high school students. One kid put his hand up. He said, I think I know. He said, what's that? He said, Buddha. No, not Buddha. Another kid raised his hand. He said, is it Muhammad Ali? He thought was the founder of Islam, not the boxer from the 1970s. And then eventually another kid raised his hand and he said, God, apparently one of the honor students. But what he said is that you just demonstrated to me that you know very well what the world has to say about sexuality, but maybe you've just overestimated what you know of what the church teaches on human sexuality. I think for a lot of people, young as well as old, they understand the church's teaching simply as a list of prohibitions. I remember seeing a little greeting card once, caught my eye. It had 3 nuns on the front of it. And it says, on your birthday, remember our motto. If it feels good, don't do it. Now, unfortunately, this is pretty much what a lot of Catholics and non-Catholics think the church's teachings essentially is. It's just one big no. But I think we need to challenge this notion because we, I think, have a generation, especially of young people now, who've been raised in the church who know everything they're not supposed to do, right? They go to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, Catholic youth group, and then they get to university, and the boy's thinking, okay, I got this down. I can't sleep with my girlfriend, I can't live with my girlfriend, I can't look at porn with my girlfriend, I can't have an abortion with my girlfriend, I can't clone my girlfriend. I learned that in bioethics class. Okay, great. I know everything I can't do with a woman. Well, what am I supposed to do? Oh, well, sorry we didn't cover that. Good luck in life. We're just not doing a good enough job of teaching them more than thou shalt nots. And I think that one big reason all this is happening, this sexual confusion, chaos, is because that people really don't think about sex much, especially young people, especially teenage boys almost never ever think about sex, right? They talk about it, joke about it, watch it on their phones, but they don't stop and think about it. What is the purpose and the meaning of my human sexuality? What is God's plan for it? And we know basic theology, sex is for babies and bonding. Okay, that's the purpose of sex, but what's the meaning of sexual intimacy? One thing we glean from John Paul II's Theology of the Body is that you could think of sexual intimacy as the wedding vows made flesh. That when you stand on the altar, you make these promises. Do you come here today freely, without reservation, to give yourselves to one another? Will you welcome children? Yes, our love is free, it's total, it's faithful, it's open to life, it's ordered towards procreation. And then the couple leaves the church. They go to the sanctuary of their bedroom, and then on their honeymoon, they speak the wedding vows not with the words, but with the bodies. I give my body to you tonight freely. I'm not coercing you, manipulating you, pressuring you, paying you. This is a free gift of self. I hold back nothing from you, not even my fatherhood. It is total. It is faithful, not just with my body, but my imagination. And it's fruitful. It's never sterilized or contracepted. The wedding vows are made flesh. And I think what the world has done is inverted the wedding vows when it comes to sex. Sex is no longer free. It's paid for in prostitution. It's demanded in sexual abuse and rape. It's not total. It's hookups and friends with benefits. It's not faithful. It's adultery, broken marriages. It's not fruitful. It's deliberately sterilized and contracepted. The entire wedding vows are inverted in the culture. And then people wonder why they're not satisfied. And so the world's solution is, well, we need more sexual, techniques. So you look at Cosmo magazine, 101 ways to thrill a man, 500 sex tips in the bedroom. It's almost like they're trying to make up with technique what they're lacking in substance. But you look at what Peter Kraft said, the philosopher. He said, people only buy a book on plumbing when their pipes are broken. What we have right now is a culture, I think, of broken pipes. We've gotten so far from God's original design for man and woman. Because God's original design, like a lot of people when we think of marriage, think of, well, that's what two people do. They exchange vows and they live together and love each other. When the church speaks of marriage, she's not speaking primarily about what two people do. The church is primarily speaking about what two people become. meaning an image of Christ's love for the church. We know St. Paul saying, a man shall leave his father and his mother, cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, he says, with Christ and the church. Well, what is he getting at? Now, I was reading online once what Jewish betrothals were like at the time of Christ. And apparently, if you wanted to ask a Jewish woman to marry you, typically you would do it in the presence of her family under a huppah, which is like a canopy, and you would exchange a glass of wine. If she were to drink the wine that you offered her as this proposal, you would enter into this covenant relationship with her. That's how the proposal would begin. And then the groom would say to the future bride that he needs to go away, and he's going to go to prepare a place for her. Where the place would be the house of the father. And so he would leave her with gifts, and then he would go off to the place of the father, where he would begin to prepare a place for the bride and the groom. Now, while he's preparing the place, he's not in charge of deciding the wedding date. That's up to the father. The father of the groom decides when the wedding will take place based upon when he thinks the accommodations are adequate. And so the groom does not know the day or the hour of the wedding, only the father would know this. Now, when the wedding feast happens, it's announced. The bridegroom would announce it. He would blow a shofar, which is like the horn of a ram. It could come in the middle of the night. And so the bridesmaids needed to be prepared with oil and their lamps to meet the bridegroom to get ready for the wedding feast, which would then last numerous days before their love was consummated in this blissful exchange of life-giving love. What did I just give you? This is the public ministry of Jesus Christ. For a modern culture, Australians and Americans, we don't pick up on all this stuff. But for the Jews, it would have been obvious. And she, the bride, to get ready for this wedding, would prepare herself with a nuptial bath. The bride would take a bath and fragrant aromas and spices so that her body would be as clean and as beautiful as possible. Now, I imagine the groom would hopefully take a bath as well. I'm sure she'd appreciate that, but there's not as much in the literature on that one. But she would take this bath to prepare for the one flesh union. And you read what Paul says, and that Christ, his love for his bride, he cleanses her with a bath of water with the word. And to our ears, a bath, what does a bath have to do with wedding? Well, baptism takes place before the one flesh union of the Eucharist. All of these things fly over our heads just because we're not rooted deep enough in this Jewish culture. But for the Jews, they understood it. The early Christians, they got it. I mean, look at St. Thomas Aquinas. On his deathbed, he asked the other monks to bring him the Song of Songs and read that to him. The angelic doctor of the church wanted erotic love poetry spoken to him as he was passing into eternal life. And because he knew that nothing on earth, is a better reflection of God's love for humanity and his plan for our salvation than the one flesh union of a husband and a wife. Now, this is not imposing theology on sex. What this is doing is unveiling God's original design for it. Because if we understand what sex properly is, the wedding vows made flesh and a visible manifestation of the love of God for humanity, then when it comes to sexual ethics, the question to really ask is, are we expressing God's love in and through our bodies? If a measuring stick is free, total, faithful, fruitful, then you can use that to apply to different questions of sexual ethics. Okay, adultery. Is it really free, total, faithful, life-giving? No. What about pornography? What about masturbation? What about contraception? And this issue of contraception, and we know, historically, it was all promised. Oh, well, contraception, it is going to be the best thing since sliced bread. It is responsible, it is safe, it's efficient, it'll give you greater control of your sex life, it's going to decrease HIV, it's going to decrease unwed pregnancy, decrease the number of abortions. Everything is just going to be fantastic. Whereas, what else are you going to use? The calendar rhythm method? Oh, yeah, that's going to really work. The NFP, like the calendar rhythm method, which is not NFP, the rhythm method had a failure rate of about 30%. Now, I'm a big fan of the rhythm method. My parents tried it and it didn't work, and I'm right here today, so that's a good deal. But if I want to play with my kids, wait, you nap. We use natural family planning, which according to the British Medical Journal is more than 99% effective. Unfortunately, not a lot of young couples know about this. In fact, I give talks to the engaged couples for the Diocese of San Diego sometimes, and before the talk, the diocese used to give them a survey to kind of assess what these incoming couples knew about natural family planning, which unfortunately was not much. Because marriage preparation today is not marriage prep. I mean, marriage prep today is triage, right? I mean, this is a last-ditch effort to try to evangelize couples you might not see ever again in the church. So they give them this survey, and I go, well, what do you know about NFP? And they asked them, in one sentence, define natural family planning. This 26-year-old woman said, that's a way to have sex that meets church requirements. Now, doesn't that sound like fun? Next survey said this, in one sentence, define natural family planning. This female said, that's a planning method which is very old-fashioned. Very old-fashioned. Like, if you really want an old-fashioned family planning method, the way to go is contraception. Because we have records of about 4,000 years old of civilizations using contraception. What would they do? Ancient Egyptians would insert into the woman's body crocodile dung. I read of one historian who said the reason he believes they used the dung of a crocodile is because there was actually a fertility god at the time, near the Nile of the crocodile. And so if you wanted any fertility-related petitions, you'd offer sacrifice to that god. And so he thought it was only reasonable they were inserting the spermicidal dung of a crocodile into the woman's body. Now, at the time of Christ, there were other concoctions. There were potions, there were different, they would fumigate the woman's uterus with smoke. They would bind her waist tightly to expel any conceived children. At the time of Christ, there was actually a Roman gynecologist named Cyrannus of Ephesus, and we still have his writings. 40 different recipes for spermicidal concoctions at the time of Christ. Now, the Christians, obviously, the early Christians, early church fathers, were universally against the practice of contraception, just as the Jews were at that time. Now, in the Middle Ages, things started to get a little more advanced. They would have amulets that women would wear around their necks, superstitious amulets to ward off pregnancy. These amulets would sometimes include the liver of a cat or the earwax of a mule, and the woman would wear that around her neck. Personally, I think it worked pretty well, because if you're wearing like cat liver, I'm not interested. But now, they would also use potions of sterility that the woman would swallow. They discovered that some of the things in these potions of sterility included lead, mercury, arsenic, and strychnine that the women were taking. Odds are it's a good contraceptive because mom's dead. And so they have her swallow these things. Now, the Protestant reformers, interestingly, were unanimously against this. Martin Luther spoke about the exceedingly foul deed of Onan, the basest of wretches, is the most disgraceful sin. We call it unchastity. It's a sodomistic sin. It's more atrocious than incest and adultery. John Calvin called contraception a monstrous thing. John Wesley said it is evidence of vile affection. Those who commit the sin of Onan displease the Lord and destroy their own souls. I mean, this is stronger language than you would ever hear in a Catholic homily on this topic coming from the Protestant reformers. Now, in the 1800s, they invented the vasectomy. Now, I read an British medical journal back then that said the vasectomy was to be used on men who were delinquents, morons, drug addicts, and idiots. These are the ones originally intended for the vasectomy. Now, Sigmund Freud eventually got a vasectomy. He said that contraception is perverse, but he got a vasectomy. He said he thought it would rejuvenate him. Now, I'm not sure if that worked, but in the 1930s, they came up with some new ideas. In the 1930s, women's magazines like Cosmo Today back then would recommend that women insert into their body Lysol or athlete's foot medicine as a contraceptive, unless we think, oh my goodness, that is just barbaric. Today's spermicides contain ingredients that are in household cleaners and laundry detergent. I mean, we really haven't advanced that much. Now, the Protestants, though, at about this time, were also still against this, because what happened, in 1920, the Anglicans said this: we utter an emphatic warning against the use of unnatural means of avoiding conception. Now, by the 1930s, though, they changed their mind. They had this Lambeth Conference. And after the Anglicans said that in some circumstances, some people could use contraception, you know what the Protestants did? They didn't all cave in. They all protested against this. I mean, look what the Lutherans said after this. Lutherans said birth control is one of the most repugnant of modern aberrations, representing a 20th century renewal of pagan bankruptcy. The Methodist Episcopal Church said this whole disgusting birth control movement rests on the assumption of man's sameness with animals. It's certainly, what the Anglican said, does not represent the Methodist Church, and I doubt if it represents any other Protestant church on what it has said on the subject. Southern Baptists It said legislation to allow distribution of birth control would be vicious in character and would prove seriously detrimental to the morals of the nation. And it wasn't just the Protestants. Muhammad Gandhi said this: "Man has sufficiently degraded women for his lust, and contraception, no matter how well-meaning the advocates may be, will still further degrade her. Self-indulgence with contraceptives may prevent the coming of children, but will sap the vitality both of men and women, perhaps more of men than of women." Now, unfortunately, shortly after this, the Protestants one by one began to cave in on this issue. And then we see by 1950, the invention of the birth control pill. Now, one of the main doctors who invented the pill, Dr. John Rock, was a Catholic. And he wanted the church to endorse the use of the pill. And what he realized is that when he invented the pill, women were not having a period anymore. And he realized that, look, women aren't going to like that because it's not going to be natural. And if we want to sell this as some type of natural, medicine, then the woman has to at least have a period. And they realized she wasn't having any on the pill. Well, why? Because it's a synthetic pregnancy hormone. So as long as she's on it, her brain thinks she's pregnant. It goes to the pituitary gland and tells her brain she's pregnant. That sends a signal to the ovaries not to ovulate. So he said, what we need to do is give the woman maybe, 3.5 weeks of synthetic sex hormones, and then drop her off of that. And in the other pills, don't put anything in those. They call them sugar, blank, or placebo pills. And so there's going to be nothing in those. That way, for 3.5 weeks of the month, her brain will think she's pregnant. And then we're going to withdraw off of the pregnancy hormones. She will experience a physiological miscarriage of sorts, where her brain thinks I'm no longer pregnant. She will bleed for about a week, and then we're going to put her back on the pregnancy hormones with the next pack of pills. So on any given year, a woman on the pill, her brain will think she's pregnant 12 times a year and having 12 miscarriages a year, wreaking havoc on what is going on within the woman's body. Now, most women, unfortunately, have no idea how the pill is working in their body. They don't know that it doesn't just stop ovulation, more often it just inhibits ovulation, meaning sometimes she may still ovulate. Modern day pills, some of them let women ovulate more than 60% of their menstrual cycles, meaning a woman can be getting pregnant more than half of the year on the pill, but they don't know because it also thins out the inside of the uterus called the endometrium. So if you do get pregnant on the pill, the baby's aborted when he's about a week old before she even knew she's pregnant. Her period comes, she'll never know that was a miscarriage caused by the hormones of the pill because they thinned out the inside of the uterus, the baby couldn't get the nourishment. But they don't tell the women this. They don't tell the husbands this. That, wait a minute, you're saying if we're having sex and we're on the pill, we could be aborting children we don't even know that we conceived. Doctors are not informing women of this. And this is nothing new. I mean, when they invented the pill in the 1950s, they tested it on poor people in the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico because you could not test on American women. Because, the women would sue you. The high-powered attorneys against the pharmaceutical companies, they didn't want it. So they tested on poor people. And what they discovered is they were testing the female pill and the male birth control pill, because they've got both of them. And when they tested the female pill and the male pill, the guys who took the male pill, some of them have a slight shrinkage in their testes. So the guys were like, no thank you, no pill for me. And they wouldn't touch it. The women they tested on, 3 of them died. So they adjusted the dosage and kept testing on the women. The male pills never really made it to the market because the pharmaceutical companies say, look, guys aren't going to take it. Because it's your pregnancy, not mine. You don't put those chemicals in my body. And they also said that men will be much more aggressive in litigation when they start suffering the physical side effects of birth control. And so just let the women take all this stuff. Today, there is birth control pills for guys, patches for guys, implants for guys, shots for guys, gels for guys. All of the female forms of birth control, more or less, hormonally, they have for men. But they don't market it because the idea is, well, guys aren't going to take it. So let's just put it in the women's bodies. But this is, to me, not sexual liberation. Now, in the midst of all of this, Pope Paul VI drops this on the church and it lands like a bomb. Humana Vitae. To give you some historical context, this was landed in the church 50 years ago, 1968. This is between Woodstock and the Summer of Love. This is the era it landed in, and it didn't go over well. People, universally never read the thing, but they just rejected it. But what you'll find in here when you read it, it's prophetic, in particular the 17th chapter. This is where Paul VI says, what is going to happen if contraception becomes the norm? He says, first, the door is going to be opened up wide towards marital infidelity and a general lowering of morality. Check, that's happened. He says, men, especially the young, who are so vulnerable on this point, need to have encouragement to be faithful to the moral law so they are not offered some easy means of eluding its observance. It is to be also feared that man, getting used to the use of contraception, will finally lose respect for the woman and no longer caring for her physical and psychological well-being, may come to the point of considering her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment and no longer as his respected and beloved companion. Check. He goes on and says to be also feared how governments are going to use this for things like population control. And this is happening all over. I was down in the Philippines doing a bunch of talks. Before we were about to leave, I asked our host, can we drive by the cathedral just to make a visit to the Blessed Sacrament before we go to the airport? And we pull into the parking lot where the bishop's residence was, and there's a huge crowd of poor people and laying down in the street in front of the bishop's residence. I'm like, well, what's going on here? And they start holding up signs, we want abortion, we want contraception, we want... And I was so confused because I think I know the poor, and I've never seen the poor begging for abortion, begging for contraception, because to the poor, their wealth is their families. And I said, how can this be happening? And they said, oh, no, it's not the poor asking for that. And they said, you see those people over there? Those are the ones with the family planning clinics that have come from overseas. And what they do is they go into the barrios to the poor people, and they tell them, you carry our signs, and you do what we ask you to do, and we will feed you with a luncheon after this parade. And so these illiterate poor people just hold up these little signs, and then the other guys call in the news crews, so all the media shows up to report these poor people begging for abortion and contraception. What's going on is what Paul VI promised would happen, that governments would start using these things against the people. Because the solution to poverty has never been to reduce the number of innocent poor children. The solution to poverty is to reduce the number of corrupt rich politicians. That's the solution to it. But Paul VI saw this whole thing coming. But I think what he wasn't even able to predict was the massive side effects on the woman's physiology. When a woman takes contraceptives, hormonal contraceptives, her body experiences more than 150 physiological changes from head to toe. I read of one journal that was discussing this, and they said that women on the birth control pill blink 32% more often than those not on the birth control pill. I mentioned this at a high school assembly, and some girls were like, hey, look, that girl's on the pill. And the other girl's like, no, I'm not, cut it out, stop it, guys. But why is she blinking more? Well, sometimes women who go on the pill complain their contact lenses have become less comfortable. Why? Because the pill will actually steepen the outside of your eye and dehydrate it as well, making the contact lenses fit not as well and also be drier on the eye, coming from the hormones of the pill. Other side effects going on: increased risk of breast cancer. This is from the World Health Organization. The companies that make the birth control pill now openly admit the risk of breast cancer. This science article came out, said, can taking the pill dull a woman's sexual desire forever? Now, when a woman goes on the pill, it increases her SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. This is well known. When this goes up, the level of testosterone in a woman goes down. Now, when she goes off the pill, they thought that would go back up. But they're finding when a woman goes off the pill, her sex drive is not going up back to where it had originally been. One of the articles said that there is a possibility that it is imprinting a woman for the rest of her life. In terms of the birth control shot, Depo-Provera, the company that makes this has been sued for more than $700 million because of how it thins out the girl's bones. There's American girls now, 20 years old, who have the bones of a 60-year-old woman in their body. But in California now, who they're giving the shot to? Child molesters and rapists. The Department of Corrections website in California says child molesters, rapists, sex offenders now are to be punished by Depo-Provera treatment. The inmates shall continue getting injections till it's no longer necessary. They inject child molesters with girls' birth control because it'll decrease their desire for sex. But you know who they won't give it to now are dogs. Veterinarians actually refuse to. They said this is not safe enough for our house pet, but they'll give it to any teenage girl that wants it for birth control. This one came out, Implanon. It's a plastic stick. They cut the girl's arm open, slide it under her skin, sew it shut, and it sinks hormones in her so she doesn't get pregnant. You read the fine print on it, and it says, ladies on Implanon, call your doctor right away. If you start coughing up blood, you go completely blind or unconscious. How is she supposed to make the phone call? I mean, what's going on? I mean, and then this one, this is real interesting. It's not just about what happens to the woman's body. What happens to the rest of the environment? What they're discovering in the States right now is that water filter treatment plants were not created to filter sex hormones out of urine. So what's happening is when women on the pill use the restroom with a country of 300 million people, it goes into the water treatment plants and down into the creeks. And so what they're discovering is they're studying the quality of nature in the marine life above the river from the treatment plant and downstream from the treatment plant. And what they're finding is when these sex hormones get into the ecosystem, it's marinating the animals and the fish in synthetic sex hormones. What's going on with this? What's happening is they're discovering it's bending the gender of the animals. They said they did one study in Colorado. They had 123 trout, and they found 101 were female and only 12 were male. And they found 10 that were intersex fish with male and female features. One scientist said, "This is the first thing I've seen as a scientist that really scares me." Up in Seattle, it says birth control pills can curb the reproduction of more than just the women taking them. In frogs, river otters, and fish, scientists are finding the presence of female hormones making the male species less male. Estrogen is bending the gender of male fish. In Canada, they're finding male fish with eggs in their testes. They're finding hermaphrodite fish. And they were asked the environmentalists, well, what you going to do about this? I mean, you're polluting the environment. I mean, you're all green and everything. What are you going to do about this? And here's what they said. Hey, nobody needs to think about cutting back on birth control for the creek's sake. You know, one of the guys said, that's getting into the bedroom and I'm not going there. In other words, just chuck the frogs under the bus. You know, and they said, look, no. One person said, look, we're not going to get into this. He said, no matter what type of birth control you choose, it is guaranteed to have less of an impact on the environment than the unwitting creation of a fossil fuel burning, diaper wearing copy of yourself. It says, a child is a massive carbon emitter. I mean, like what? I have 7 carbon emitters at home, by the way, and they're wonderful. But you see, it's like, oh, green this, everything's got to be organic hairspray, organic this, organic that, everything's natural. Then when it comes to our sexuality, you have people clamoring, oh, sex is natural. Why can't you look at porn? Sex is natural. Why can't I sleep with my girlfriend? Sex is natural. Have you ever noticed that people who talk the most about how natural sex is are the very people who are least likely to have natural sex? Oh, sex is natural? Why don't you have natural sex? One man, one woman, no contraception, no chemicals, that's it. Why don't you have natural sex? Ooh, hey, no, that's kind of irresponsible. That's kind of risky. I mean, what if a child comes? What if bonding? What if all this stuff? They're always saying how much they want natural sex, but in reality, they're scared of it. And some people think, okay, look, fine. Okay, hormones, whatever, bad. What about a condom? I mean, really, what could be so bad about a piece of latex for the environment, for a woman's body? Well, what's interesting is we know from 7th grade biology, one sperm gets a girl pregnant. Okay. What happens if there are hundreds of millions of sperm introduced to a woman through a single act of intercourse? It used to be believed that if they were not successful in fertilizing the egg, they serve no purpose. Scientists have discovered this is not true at all. In a man's seminal fluid are literally dozens of biological ingredients. After intercourse, the woman's white blood cells will scour the surface of her cervix, bringing the man's sperm proteins and DNA into her body to her lymph nodes, where her immune system will begin to recognize and memorize the genetic type of that man's sperm. So if she does become pregnant by him, her womb will recognize the genetic type of baby, match it to the genetic type of sperm that had nourished the uterine wall, and it makes for an easier pregnancy. Now, when a woman is not exposed to the sperm of the partner and then all of a sudden becomes pregnant after the use of the condom, they found she's more than twice as likely to suffer preeclampsia during childbirth. Now, this is in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and I was sitting on an airplane, and I had the journal out, and I was typing it into a book I was writing. And the woman leans over to me from the next seat. She says, oh, what are you writing about? I'm like, hey. I said, this is an epidemiologic study of contraception and preeclampsia, and I kind of explained it to her. And she said, oh, can I see that? And I showed her the paragraphs, and she said, this is amazing. She said, you know what, my husband and I, she said, I know I just met you, but I feel like I know you so well. She said, my husband and I have been married for 10 years. She said, we've used the condom between every child, and we had 3. And she said, every single pregnancy I had preeclampsia. How come they didn't teach this to us in marriage preparation class? And to me, the most remarkable part of the journal article is where it talks about couples using a condom as couples having unprotected sexual intercourse, because the man is not protecting the woman with the beneficial effects of his semen. And this study has been replicated in a number of other journals. But the reason I like this one the best, this whole article on conception just happened to be published on December 8th, which happens to be the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in the church. So I always appreciate when they time their articles around our liturgical calendar. And some say, okay, well, fine, look, you're not going to use the condom. I mean, what's the alternative? The calendar rhythm method? I mean, NFP? I mean, well, doesn't that involve abstinence? It does involve abstinence. In fact, when I give talks to engaged couples in San Diego, they don't know anything about NFP, so you can have a lot of fun with them. And so I'll say, now, when you're going to use NFP, it just means that you need to abstain from sex for about 27 days of the month, and you see the group, they're like, oh, I'm just kidding, and that's just how chastity speakers have fun. But no, it's not 27 days. In fact, studies show that couples who use NFP have intercourse as often as those who do not. They simply time it differently. A friend of mine, he and his wife couldn't have kids, all these miscarriages, fertility issues. They go to a fertility doctor, and the doctor says to them, now I need you and your wife to abstain for sex for 30 days so I can chart her fertility. My friend looked at the doctor and he said, really? Like 30 days of abstinence? The doctor like, yes, 30 days of abstinence. My friend was like, well, does it need to be 30 consecutive days of abstinence? The doctor was like, yeah, it's just 30 days of abstinence. Now, the hospital there was in a Catholic hospital. The nurse in attendance there was a religious sister, a 70-year-old celibate woman. And so when my friend gasped, a month? The nun looked at him and she said, you'll be all right. And he realized he's gonna be okay, and he was. And they were able to conceive and have a family. But I think it's interesting, when you look at how happy people are with different modes of family planning, it says a lot. And so secular doctors have studied this. Spermicides, couples who use it this year, 42% will use it next year. Condom, 53%. Depo-Provera, the shot, 56, diaphragm, 57, pill, 68, patch, 68, NFP, 89. It has the highest rate of continual use annual among any form of family planning that is reversible. And so why? What are these couples excited about this? Why do they like it? Well, there's different benefits you get from NFP you do not get from different forms of contraception. One, you get the relational benefits. I remember one wife, she said to me, after going from contraceptives to NFP, she said, I now know the true meaning of the word intimate. Now, when was the last time you heard anyone say that with contraception? Like, well, now that we're using the diaphragm, I now know the meaning of the word intimate. The enthusiasm has just really never been there. Because I really believe no woman wants to contracept. I mean, she might want to have intercourse without having babies, but she's never wanted to be at war with her own physiology in order to accomplish this. And so we know something's off. Like I saw one condom advertisement. It said, our condom is like 0.1 millimeter thinner, greater intimacy. And you want to tell me, hey, switching condom brands isn't really the way to build intimacy with a woman, but they're kind of onto something here that, the barrier between the partners is a barrier between persons. What's the language of sex? I give myself totally to you. What's the language of contraception? I give myself to you, but let me put my protection in place. I give myself totally to you, but I'm going to kill any of your sperm that come my way. I mean, is this the language of war or love and self-giving? And so we know something's off here. And so, but with NFP, I find you get that relational benefit, and it makes, I think, in particular, a man a better lover. Now, why? Often I'll speak at high schools about chastity. After one assembly, this boy came up to me and with his girlfriend, and he's like, man, that talk is really good. But he's like, honestly, we're having sex. But he said, look, if we're not having sex, if I don't have sex with her, what are we supposed to do? And I told him, exactly. He said, what do you mean exactly? I said, now you got to figure that out. Now that this is off the table, you have to find other ways to express love and intimacy with her outside of the bedroom. And this is going to make you a much better lover, because there's so much more to love about her than just her body. It stirs up that creative ability to want to know how to authentically love someone, that not every kiss needs to lead to the bedroom. And these boys can begin to learn that abstinence is an expression of love. This is one of the greatest assets you can bring into a marriage, the understanding that abstinence is an expression of love. Because if a man does not know that before marriage, and he expects his wife to be constantly sexually available, it typically leads to a lot of tension and resentment. Because we need to understand that, okay, I'm, 4,000 miles away from my wife tonight? my abstinence tonight is an expression of love for her. If I get home and she's exhausted from dealing with the kids, again, the abstinence that night can be an expression of love for her, of that understanding. And a friend of mine practiced this, I think, in a really heroic way. His wife had been sexually abused when she was younger and never went to counseling. So when they got married, some of the memories started coming up. And she told her husband, now, I can't be physically close to you because of the flashbacks right now, and it's too hard for me. And he was a great man. I totally understand, honey. I show you love in other ways. And a week of abstinence went by in marriage. All right, that happens. And a month went by of abstinence in marriage. Okay, that happens. And 2 months and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 months of abstinence now. At which time this husband really started wrestling with this. And he started praying like, God, like, Jesus, I didn't sign up for this. And Jesus is like, actually you did. Good times, bad, sickness and health. But he really got challenged in his own masculinity. Because his wife was so frigid towards him, it made him feel much less masculine. But he realized he had a very wounded notion of masculinity. That my manhood isn't measured by how responsive women are to me in bedroom. No, I'm more a man to my bride through this cross of abstinence than I could ever be to her in the bedroom. And through this trial, not only did God heal his notion of masculinity, the wife was healed in the process as well through his selfless love. Now, if he did not know how abstinence can be an expression of love, and he demanded the right of a husband or whatever, his woundedness would have only infected her wound. But he had this understanding, this can be an expression of love. And so in many ways, women need space in a relationship. Because for a man, we don't get a lot of physical contact as it is. Like you go to work, you might shake someone's hand. That could be as much as you touch anyone all day. Now, if the wife happens to be a stay-at-home mom, she could be suffocated by touch by 9 o'clock in the morning. I remember one morning, I was sleeping, it was like 5 in the morning, and I felt like this pressure on my face. I'm like, what is this? I look up, and one of my children is standing on my face. My 3-year-old daughter, she's like, oh, did I wake you up? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, let's have a tea party with dinosaurs in my room. I'm like, dude, that's 5 a.m. Now let's multiply that by the time it's 6 p.m. She could be suffocated by touch. And that's why the husband's understanding of creating space in the marriage could serve to build intimacy. And this is why it's no big surprise that couples who use natural family planning have a divorce rate under 4%. And granted, it's not simply their family planning method that's contributing to their low divorce rate. They're probably more religiously devout, taking their vows more seriously. It's a number of contributing factors. But the fact is, the very same virtues you need for NFP, patience, self-control, sacrifice, these are the very same virtues that build up a strong marriage. And what you'll often find is sometimes when NFP is used in marriage, it will bring to the surface things that need to get healed. Because marriage, one of the functions of marriage is the sanctification of the spouses, where your faults come to the surface like oil and water. Because before marriage, we think we're pretty good people, right? Before marriage, I'm like, I'm a pretty good catch. I'm selfless, I'm patient, I'm forgiving. And then you get married, and you're like, I'm a jerk. And you realize, whoa, I got a lot of work to go here. And so what happens sometimes in the realm of human sexuality is an immaturely or an incompletely developed virtue of chastity comes right up to the surface. Where a husband realizes, well, wait, this is really hard. Wait, we can't do this, we can't do that. And yes, it can create tension sometimes and difficulty. Because I think sometimes we try to sell NFP too much, where we make it sound like just sunshine, roses, and lollipops. Like, oh, it's living the theology of the body, and it is like going from honeymoon back to engagement. And we try to sell it to these couples, and they buy it, and they realize, well, wait a minute, this is a pain in the neck. This is really hard. This is sacrificial, and this is causing tension and confusion. But we have to be able to explain to them that it's okay, that it's a little bit difficult. St. John Paul II said the perfection of love comes only through the cross. And sometimes I think God wants to bring our faults to the surface so that he can better heal them. And so not only do we have these relational benefits of NFP, you also get the physical benefits of NFP. 1, there's no side effects. 2, if you want to achieve pregnancy, you know when that fertile time is because you've learned the woman's cycle. Thirdly, you have a reproductive health chart in your hands of your spouse. I know of a woman, she and her husband had a conversion, quit using a condom, they started charting her fertility, and real quick into that, because the husband was learning right alongside with her, he said, I thought your cycle was supposed to do this here, but it's doing that there, something I don't think is right. So they took the chart to the gynecologist and said, well, look what's happening this time of the month. And he said, yeah, something's going on. And he had to check her, and sure enough, she had a thyroid issue. He said, we need to go into surgery right away. And they took her in. It turned out she had a cancerous tumor on her thyroid, and they saved her life because they were charting with natural family planning. Had they been burying these symptoms under contraceptives, he might not even have a mother to his children today. But because they opened themselves up to the will of God, God was able to bless them in this amazing way. And so for a husband's perspective, to me, that's kind of like all I need. Like, okay, is this good for our souls? Is this good for her body? Okay, this is the good one for her body? Okay, well, sign us up, let's take the classes. Because it just needs to be what is best for this person. Because I think a lot of times, especially as men, like we want to look like a knight, but we don't want to really bleed like one. And here with NFP is where Christ can kind of invite us that, hey, chastity's not over when you get married. I would even argue that chastity in marriage can be more demanding than chastity prior to marriage. But that's why we have the graces of the sacrament to live it out. Now, all these points I've just thrown out there, none of these are the reason that contraception is immoral. Contraception is not immoral because it has bad side effects. Contraception is not immoral, because NFP is more effective in this way or that way. Contraception is not immoral because it's artificial. Contact lenses are artificial, glasses are prosthetic limbs. All of this is artificial. The church is not opposed to that. The church is opposed to artificial contraception because it is contraceptive. That is the reason the church is opposed to this. And people think, well, I don't get, what's the distinction here? Well, the purpose of medicine is to aid the proper functioning of the human body. Contraceptives is using medicine to make the body that was function in a dysfunctional state. And so what it's doing is violating the purpose of sex, which is babies and bonding. And people think, well, why can't you just have the bonding without the babies? Imagine if someone wanted the other way. I want the babies, but I don't want any bonding. So I'm going to have intercourse with this woman, but I'm going to look away from her to avoid any emotional entanglement because I simply want to use her as an incubator for my offspring. But that guy's a creep. You realize something's very off there if you just want the babies and you don't want the bonding. Contraception is simply switching this and taking the bonding, but not the babies. But they're supposed to go together because what God has joined, we should not separate. Secondly, it violates the very meaning of our sexuality, which is the wedding vows made flesh. And thirdly, this is a point that John Paul II stresses in his Theology of the Body, is most fundamentally a violation of not how we should act, it's a violation of who we are as persons made in the image and likeness of God. Because we image his likeness, not primarily in our solitude, but most primarily in our communion of persons. Because when a husband and a wife love each other as they ought to, John Paul says this is a very image of the Trinity itself. And so contraception isn't simply what we shouldn't do, it simply isn't what we are. And so some will say, well, look, what's the difference, really, between using a condom and using NFP? I mean, aren't you just controlling births? The church is not opposed to controlling births. The church is opposed to contraception. Well, people say, well, what's the difference here? One analogy I think that's helpful is you think of we have two women. They both want to stay slim, so one practices bulimia. She binges on food and then she purges out its effects, and the other woman abstains from fatty foods and practices temperance and exercises. So they both have the same goal, but they take a completely different means to arrive at the end. And so one would be like NFP, where we're practicing that restraint, whereas the contraceptives indulge in the sexual act and then purge out the life-giving effects. And some say, well, come on, isn't NFP basically the same thing as contraceptives? Well, you could say, well, if that's the case, if they're basically the same thing, then just use NFP. And they'll be like, well, whoa, but that would be a huge difference. Well, if there's a huge difference in the method, there could be an indication there might be a huge difference in the morality as well. And, I'll grant you, it's difficult. And I think there's this mentality, though, that if you're a good Catholic, you use NFP. If you're a bad Catholic, you use contraception. This is the wrong way to look at this thing. Good Catholics are open to life with children as the supreme gift of marriage. And if they can't have kids for whatever good reason, then they can fall back on NFP. NFP is not the default position. A lot of couples think, well, when we get married, we're good Catholics, so we're going to use NFP right away. And we're going to not have kids for 2 or 3, 4 years, because we really want to get to know each other as spouses. Look, if you really want to get to know your spouse, have some kids. You're going to get to know them real good, real fast, if that's the goal. But the fact is, the default position is openness to life. It's like if you went to your wedding and you got to the reception and you saw all the presents there laid out at the reception, and there's one gigantic box and it said the supreme gift of marriage. You wouldn't be like, we'll open that up in 3 or 4 years. That's the first one you'd want to discover. And so we need a good reason not to open this gift. We have to understand we're living in a what is going on here? In fact, I remember asking a bunch of high school boys once. I'm like, hey guys, what is the most common sexually transmitted disease? One guy's like, I know, pregnancy. And I'm like, no, I'm like, kids aren't bacteria. But they're marinated in this culture, and it's all over the media. I saw this on MSN. It's an article entitled 10 Reasons You Should Never Have Kids. Now, I mean, I think you've written a dumb article, and if everyone agreed with you, humanity would cease to exist, okay? It's a pretty good clue, it's a bad article. But it says, here's some reasons you should never have kids. If you have kids, they said a large part of your life will be focused on your relationship with your child rather than yourself. Ugh, I hate to ruin my relationship with myself. And then it says, if you don't have kids, you won't be exposed to germs your kids bring home from daycare. That's right. Microbes are easily transmitted, and they can come home and give you aches, pains, flu-like symptoms, and diarrhea. That's true. I mean, my kids bring home like Ebola in their lunchbox. It's good. It builds your immune system. So if you don't have kids, you're going to spare yourself from back pain from lifting and carrying babies. That's right. Lifting a baby out of a car seat and into a supermarket cart can tax your core muscles and lead to back pain and other injuries over time. So apparently, if you don't have kids, you'll never lift anything over 12 pounds. It says, if you don't have kids, you can be alone anytime you want. If you don't have time to yourself, you're going to end up losing yourself. But not having kids mean you won't lose yourself. You can play tennis, do yoga, or whatever you want all the time. Now, if this weren't so funny, it'd be just absolutely depressing. That this is the inversion of the church's teachings on human freedom. That a man can only find himself in the fullest giving of himself. And what they're telling us is, no, if you give yourself, you're going to lose yourself. And the punishment that sin inflicts from contraception is not God throwing down lightning bolts. We bring the punishment on ourselves when we don't trust the Father's plan for our lives. I heard of one couple I knew, and they had, I think, 2 kids, and then they were like maybe 45, late 40s, and they're having dinner as a family, the 2 boys or whatever, the husband and wife. In the middle of the dinner, the wife just starts kind of tearing up. And the husband's like, honey, you okay? And she's like, let's talk later. And later that evening, it's like, what was going on at the dinner table? And she said, I don't know. I was just sitting there, and I saw the chairs there, and one chair had no one in it, and I just felt like somebody was missing, and I know why they're missing. It's because we just contracepted for like 15 years in our marriage. And she was left with this weight of just like, couldn't we have just had one more, but now it's too late? My grandparents, they had 10 kids. Their names were Joseph and Mary. They had a 65-year marriage. He passed away recently, and when the ambulance was picking him up to take to the hospital, he had a fall and hit his head, at one point. And the nurses were taking care of him, and they're kind of like checking his memory, like, what's your name? What's your name? He's like, Joe. Joe's my name. And the kids are there, and they said, Joe, do you have any kids? He said, yes. They said, how many kids do you have? 2. And the kids are like, oh, he said, too many. And he still had that wit at the end. But he didn't have too many. He had 10, and he loved them to death. And so to realize, are they going to be expensive? Yeah, I mean, people say, to raise a kid in today's culture is $5.8 million to raise a child. But you know what? Yeah, they may be a little expensive, but I'm telling you, there are true wealth. They're the greatest gift that we have. In fact, the love they give you is so authentic. I mean, my little daughter, Mary, I remember one day she's in the grocery store, and she saw a little bouquet of carnation flowers. And she grabbed it and she said, Mom, please let me buy them for Dad. I love him so much. And so my mom, my wife bought this for, her, and she brings it home and she gives it to me. And it was just so pure from her heart. And I put it in a little vase in my office, and I kept it there forever. And my wife's like, you need to get rid of that. There's like mold growing up the stems. And I'm like, I'll never get rid of it. And I said, fine. And I clipped one, and I said, I'm going to keep this one. And I'm going to wear that one day as a corsage on my collar. On the day that she enters the cloistered convent as a religious sister. I'm not going to be in control, but she can go to whatever convent she wants. No, she doesn't have to be a nun. I mean, as long as she marries a man who loves her more than Jesus Christ, then I'm fine with that. But the fact is that the love is so real. And the reality is, though, as I had mentioned before, like NFP, it's difficult. Contraception, I'm not going to argue. It would be more comfortable. It would be more convenient. It would be easier. But at some point, we just have to ask ourselves, what matters most, my Catholic faith or my convenience? Because sometimes you simply can't have both. And that's okay. But why does it have to be so hard? Why does it have to be so difficult? I think we need to remember, one, this is Christianity. There are hard sayings of Christ. There are many things he said. The disciples said, this is hard. Who can accept it? They said this about the Eucharist. They said this about divorce and remarriage. Oh, if you divorce and remarry another, you commit adultery. You know what his disciples say? They said, It would be better not to marry if this is the case. The disciples actually say to him, it would be better never to get married if I can't get divorced. What's the point of getting married if I can't have a divorce? This is the foundation of our church. Those are the guys that he picked. But it just shows the hardness of their hearts. But Jesus wasn't afraid to give them hard sayings. And I think the real reason why it's so hard not to have kids sometimes to listen to church is because Jesus' body has already been created. And to me, this is authentic sexual liberation, and it is God's plan for man and woman. So God bless you, and again, thank you for coming today.